baby's first element again. It's a paragraph. JavaScript. So cool, y'all. Gets an exclamation point this time. And we'll make ourselves a button. Notice, kind of cool, you can just type button tab. And it turns into the opening and closing tags and puts your cursor right in the middle. We established this is an opening tag. This is a closing tag. This whole thing is an element. Everything between the opening and closing tags are the element's contents, which could include other elements. Why not? Renders right down here. You'll see cool is now italicized because we did emphasis. Let's make our button. Click me. There it is. All right, so we wanted to do this. When something happens, do something else. We want something to happen when we click the button. So we're going to have to interact with the DOM. When we interact with the DOM in JavaScript, I just pop over to my JavaScript pane here. We get to it through document. Document dot something to interact with the DOM. If we want to grab that button so that we can do something with it, we could use document query selector. Anybody use document query selector before? It takes a string as its argument, and that string is a selector, the same stuff that CSS uses to target an element. How can we target that button? Anybody know CSS selectors? Just the string button would do. Target it by the element name. So that would get the first button on the page that it comes to. Similarly, there is query selector all, which would return all buttons in an array-like structure that's technically called a node list, but it's very array-like. But we just want one. So document.querySelector button ought to do the trick. And we could then save that to a variable. Const button. Well, slow down there, Uncle Davey. You said variable and you wrote const. It's okay, don't freak out. It's not really a constant. It's just a variable that can never be reassigned. It can be mutated. It can be changed. It just can't be completely reassigned. I could not later say button equals something else. But it's still a variable. Pre-ES6, we used what keyword to create variables? What keyword do you know to create variables in JavaScript? Var, right? Yeah. But var is kind of bad news, folks. It doesn't do scoping the way most people expect. So ES6 introduced two new keywords, const and let. So we're going to use them all the time. We're going to use const unless we know that we need let. The difference is let can be reassigned. I could assign thing to one thing and then later change thing to something else. But unless you know you need let, just get in the habit of using const because it can save you some trouble and prevent some errors along the way. Keep you from redeclaring variables you didn't mean to. But we'll get more into the differences tomorrow or the next day. But for right now, let's just get in the habit of always using const. So we just saved the actual HTML element itself into a variable. We can do that. Groovy. So now we want something to happen. How do we do that? We have the button. Now we want to say when that button is clicked, do something else. So DOM elements have a whole bunch of properties that we can get and set. One of them is called onClick. There are a whole lot of these: on mouse over, on mouse out, on submit, all kinds of stuff. Generally speaking, in JavaScript, we camel case things. Unfortunately, in the very early days, when Brendan Eich was doing that 10-day sprint to create JavaScript, he wasn't terribly consistent. So onClick is all lowercase. But we're going to be in the habit of generally camel casing things. That is, initial letter is lowercase, additional words are uppercased. Button.onClick, and we can just set that to something. We can set it to a function that runs when the click happens. So when the click happens, do something. Run the function we're about to give it. So let's make a function. Function. Say yeah. Alert. Hero. All right, so I'm going to use single quotes, generally speaking, in class. There is no functional difference between single and double quotes in JavaScript. The only difference is whether you have to escape the single quote character or the double quote character. But most style guides kind of go with single quotes by default, so we're just going to get in the habit of doing that. You may also notice I'm not using semicolons. Semicolons in JavaScript are optional. It has something called ASI, or automatic semicolon insertion. Back in the day, it was a good idea to always use semicolons because often your production code would be minified, which means there'd be a script that processes your JavaScript and compresses it to be as small as it can possibly be. Get rid of all your indentation, all your new line characters, all unneeded white space, rename all your variables to the shortest names possible. And that could not handle it if you didn't have semicolons. But that's no longer the case, so it really doesn't matter anymore. If you're going to use them, which is fine, just be consistent. Try to use them correctly. For example, there should not be a semicolon there. A function declaration does not get a semicolon, as it is not a statement, it is just an expression. But you would put one here and here. Oops. But I'm not going to use them, so. So this is how you create a function. Keyword function, name of the function, your argument list, in this case empty, semicolons, curly braces, and the contents of the function. So now that we have a function, we can say button.onClick equals say yeah. Not say yeah with parentheses. We don't want to run that thing. This would set onClick to the return value of say yeah, which is undefined. We didn't return anything, right? But the value of onClick needs to be something it can actually do. It needs to be an actual function object. Functions can be passed around like variables of any other kind. So we don't pass it to the return. We don't pass it the return value, or assign it to the return value of say yeah. We pass say yeah itself and assign that to the onClick property. And then JavaScript will automatically execute it later. It'll add the parentheses itself when you click the button. Let's see if it works. Cool. So, since functions are these first-class objects that could be assigned to variables and stuff like that, we could also do something like const do the thing equals say yeah. Now we have another variable that holds exactly the same function. Not say yeah with parentheses. That will actually assign the return value of say yeah to do the thing, and we'll execute it on the spot when it reaches line 9, which is not what we want. We want the function itself. So this is kind of the old way of doing things. Since we could do that, we could also probably, let's say const say yeah equals function without a name. So now on the right side of the equal sign, we've got an anonymous function. But we're assigning that anonymous function to a variable called say yeah. So just like you could say const lunch equals, what'd you have for lunch, Luke? Subway. So you can just put the value over here. We can just put the value of this variable over here. We can assign it the value of this anonymous function. Totally legit. Similarly, we could just not bother ever giving it a name and could just put the function itself right here. You could do that. It's maybe less clear than giving it a name because the name actually tells you what it does, right? It says, yeah. But you can totally do that. So assigning this onClick property is kind of the old school way of doing it. It has some downsides. For example, if we ever set button onClick to something else later, it would just blow away the value that was there before. Sometimes you want to have two different things happen when the same event fires. And doing it this way doesn't work. So let's look at another way to do it. DOM elements also have a built-in method called add event listener. It takes two arguments. These two things, the event you're listening for and the function that will handle the event. Functions that handle events are called event handlers. We'll be using that particular vocab word a lot. So first, what event are we listening for? Click. You just pass the string click. What function do you want to run when that click occurs? Say yeah. Again, not say yeah with parentheses. Yeah. That will run it before we even click the thing. And nothing will happen when we do click it because we just added an event listener that when it clicks does undefined. Because the return value of say yeah is undefined. We want the function itself. And as before, we could actually write the function in line there as an anonymous function. Like that. But we're not going to. Does it work? Yeah. Cool. Add event listener. When one thing happens, do another thing. You dig it? All right, let's make an actual project. Any questions about this so far? Yes, sir.
So with the event listener, that like pause the program until that event happens, or that continuously?
No, it's always just waiting for that to happen. So if whatever lines of code are underneath this will still go on. Yeah. It just adds the listener, which listens quietly in the background. Good question. Remind me your name? Colin, that's right. Colin 8000. Yes. All right. Other questions? Yeah.
So if they
Amari.
in the background, are they usually added like towards the beginning of the program?
Yeah, you'll usually add them right at the beginning. Yes. Remind me your name?
I'm Nathra.
Nathra. Yeah. Okay.
What would happen if you had multiple buttons?
What would happen if you had multiple buttons? Good question. We will definitely see that. So right now, what would it do? Query selector button. That will find the first element that matches this selector. So it will find the first one. It will not do anything when you click the second one. Yeah. Query selector all would return them both, but then we couldn't just add an event listener to the variable button because the button would be a node list. We'd have to like loop through it. Ready to move on?